56% versus 96%, a 40% difference between the tomato meter, aka the critic score, and the audience score for the Super Mario Bros. Movie. This is not a phenomenon unique to the Super Mario movie. Over the years, discourse over the seeming disconnect between critics and consumers has ramped up, whether it be from critics rating a piece of media significantly higher or lower compared to the average audience. The underlying point is, though, that sometimes critics in the audience agree and apply similar scores, and others there's a rather weird disconnect going on. Let's take a quick look at the Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe on Metacritic, with the Metascore being a 79, whereas the user score is an 8.7, that one being out of a maximum of 10. And on the surface, a difference of 0.8 may not seem like all that much, but a 79 looks very different to an 87. And I can't speak for the quality of that Kirby game since I haven't played it myself, but that disconnect is a key point that will lead me to my main point here. Review scores are freaking useless. Well, at least on their own. Let me explain. What is the point of a review score? Well, if you ask me, I would say that it offers a quick reference as to the inherent quality and general attitude towards a particular game or piece of media. Maybe you're unfamiliar with the product or series and you want to see how people tend to feel about it. So you look up its Metacritic score real quick and see a number. Okay, it's pretty high. There's a decent shot that maybe you'll like it. Well, the problem there is that the number isn't exactly defined. Fact of the matter is that we're all individuals with our own preferences and unique wants when it comes to what we want out of a game or a movie, etc. Let's hone in more on video games for a second, and player A may be way more focused on the gameplay side of things and care more about how the gameplay feels to control and what the level design is like. Player B may care more about the story and lore and how that's handled, whereas player C may be someone way more interested in the visuals and getting screenshots or relaxing with the music and stuff like that. Maybe player D is some kind of combination of the above. Just telling all four of those players a rudimentary number devoid of context inherently isn't helpful to all of them. Nor is it helpful to the consumers for the simple reason of, well, what went into the number? If the reviewer themselves cares a lot about the gameplay and really is only talking about that or any combination of things, or has one major sticking point that is unique to them that not a lot of other people share, so their score is lower or higher based upon that one piece of criteria, if the consumer doesn't have that context that is needed, then what are they supposed to do with that number? For example, if the reviewer themselves cares a lot about the gameplay and really is only talking about that or any combination of things, that's fine. But that context that person is reviewing the game through that lens is needed, because while that score could apply to the wants and needs of player A, players B and C and D don't receive useful information from that review score unless they're told about what went into constructing that number. So you may reply with, well, Jmulls, isn't it on the consumer to do additional research to find out if the product is good enough to be worthy of a purchase or not? And yeah, I will always advocate for smart consumer practices to make sure that you get what you want and don't end up buying a game or watching a movie that you may just end up not enjoying and you just end up regretting. But think about it. That's the funny thing, isn't it? If you need to do that additional research to begin with to find out if the specific areas you care about are up to your own personal standards, whatever they are, especially when I'm talking about video games here, then what's the point in the number? Outside of sparking internet arguments about how the number is inherently wrong because your opinion differs from someone else's. And there's the crux of the issue. The number only means something if you already have the context surrounding how that number came to be to begin with. But if you have the context already, then the number is irrelevant because you already got what you needed. If I read a very detailed review about a certain video game and how the mechanics work, and how they synergize with one another, how the world operates, how the story is, what's the pacing like? What's the frame rate situation? What's the port quality? And then at the very end, I get a number. What good does that number do me? I already got the information about what went into that number. I already got the useful, constructive criticism about it that I may be able to interpret for my own personal use. There's some argument to be made that you could find a reviewer where you understand their likes and dislikes and are able to approximate how you would enjoy a specific product compared to what they view of it, or what their score is of it. And if you're someone who loves platformers, like say Mario games for instance, and you find someone who has a very similar opinion to you in regards to that genre, then great. A review score could be a pretty decent guesstimate about whether or not you may enjoy a particular product and how much. And it could just be good enough for you, depending on how much you want to be spoiled about various parts of the game. And you could trust that information about the quality of the overall product and whether or not you want to purchase a game or play it in the first place. At the same time, no one shares the exact same preferences, and that is also extremely individualized. So an aggregate score based on numerous different people's opinions is probably not going to help you, because you then lose that individualization that gave that individual critic's review score a sense of helpfulness or usefulness to you to begin with, because you lose the context behind the number in lieu of a general umbrella number that just speaks to the overall subjective quality of the game that people felt at the time, without giving you information that may be pertinent to your purchasing decision. You may have very specific needs or wants out of a particular piece of media or the game that a general review score is not going to provide you with. How many times when a big new game comes out does an inevitable internet debate start about how someone may have rated a game or what the Rotten Tomatoes or Metacritic score is about the game? The thing is, there is no correct answer, and devolves the discourse to rudimentary sport team debates about who's the GOAT or what team you're a fan of, while missing the actual information to you, the consumer. Last year's discourse over what was Game of the Year is the perfect encapsulation about how utterly useless this debate over which game is quote-unquote better or has a higher review score is at the end of the day. The two big heavy hitters last year were Elden Ring and God of War by a country mile, and the debates and vitriol that was thrown around in regards to which game was better was wild to see. Sure, it can be fun every now and then to rep the game that you really care for, so long as you're not weirdly serious about it. Because at the end of the day, these two games appeal to different audiences with different preferences, so trying to make a blanket statement about what or which game was Game of the Year achieves nothing. It informs no one as to the actual nature of these games, and which you should purchase, if either at all, depending on what your preferences are at the time. Elden Ring is an open-world player agency-driven experience that rewards exploring the world of the lands between to find various treasures, bosses, and new equipment, on top of locales to better equip yourself to tackle future challenges, with the story taking place largely in item descriptions or very, very brief cutscenes every now and then. It's a very hands-off experience where the game just throws you into the world of the lands between and says, go, have fun, explore to your heart's content and at your own pace. God of War Ragnarok is a follow-up to 2018's story-driven game that adds on to that formula, fleshes out the customization but is still story-forward, with a bunch of fun and difficult side content to partake in if you want to. But the main driving force behind the game is the cutscene and dialogue-heavy story that is going on involving both Kratos and his son Atreus. These are different games fundamentally. If I told you, and you had no knowledge about Elden Ring or God of War Ragnarok, and I told you, say, Elden Ring was a 7 out of 10, and God of War Ragnarok was a 8.5 out of 10. Those numbers mean nothing because you do not know what went into those numbers. It's impossible to state one game is objectively better than the others, or than the other. Heck, neither were my Game of the Year last year. That goes to Xenoblade Chronicles 3. But do you see what I'm talking about here? This debate doesn't help the consumer. Same with the concept and discussions surrounding review score, because it's a concept that requires additional context to actually be helpful and to convey useful information to the consumer. And if you already have that context, then you no longer need the number. Heck, people can't even settle on what a 10 out of 10 means, and whether or not a 10 out of 10 means a game you enjoyed a ton, or is a definition of a perfect game. And since no game is perfect, no game should be a 10 out of 10. Some people would disagree. People can't even agree on if a 7 out of 10 is a good game or not, or if it's a game worthy of being skipped, because we inherently put different meanings to these numbers. To you, a 5 out of 10 could mean average, or maybe you are preconditioned from schooling to think a 50% is a fail. These numbers, by themselves, standing on their own, devoid of additional context surrounding them, are not helpful. I think over time, the value of these review scores has gone down somewhat. I remember back in the day, really getting introduced to these concepts about the games industry by watching a lot of Total Biscuit videos, and largely agreeing with his arguments, especially when it came to the topic of review score, and how shockingly useless they are as a concept. We are all consumers, and we should be partaking in smart consumer practices to mitigate the chance that we play a game that we end up regretting. I like to think that I at least somewhat engage in smart consumer practices, and I haven't regretted a game purchase in years because of it. And here's even an example. Let's say I'm a game reviewer. I kind of am, because I do video game reviews every now and then. But let's say I review Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and I say this is one of my favorite games of all time, and I don't even say that. I just give you the number, 10 out of 10. You would probably be like, oh cool, that game must be one of the best games ever made. For me, it is. But what I don't tell you, because of that number, is that the game is extremely polarizing, and it's composed of a bunch of individual components that are all inherently polarizing that may not resonate with you or may undermine your enjoyment of the overall experience, whereas for me, they didn't. And the strengths of the game was so strong that I didn't care about the negatives associated with that game. So for me, it is a 10 out of 10, because it's my second favorite game of all time. I love that game to death. I've played it multiple times. But for you, that number is pointless if you don't have that context. And if you already had the context about what went into forming the number to begin with, then the number itself is meaningless because you already know the useful information. Even if you somehow fit the criteria of having found a reviewer where you understand their preferences and are able to extrapolate useful information from them, you still shouldn't be relying on just a number anyways. Check to make sure that the port to the platform of your choosing is sufficient or poor. Be smart. But what you need to make sure is that you think it's worthy of making a purchase, because a value of a game or the associated value of that game will vary based on the individual. So just do the information to where you get to the point where you feel comfortable saying, I want to buy this or I want to play this. Just get to that point. That point will be different for every person. So my criteria may be different from yours. It doesn't make mine better, doesn't make mine worse. My criteria are there so that I can find games that I find enjoyable. Just have your own criteria so that you can find the games that you find enjoyable. And there is a bit of a disconnect here, I will agree, with movies or TV shows versus games, because most movies are way shorter than games. So the time investment is wildly different. You could just go off the genre knowing you want to watch, say, a comedy movie. You see a decent score like an 8 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10, you decide, you know what, screw it, let's give it a shot. And for that purpose, yeah, maybe the number is all you need to establish whether something is worth taking a shot on, or you just need a brief summary of the movie, like a little blurb or something. And yeah, for a movie that's probably going to run you 90 minutes to 2 hours, or 2.5 to 3, somewhere in there, on average, it's going to be a way less time investment than, say, a video game. Because a game most of the time, again, most of the time, if we're not talking about a game like Journey, will be a far greater investment. So taking the time to gather your information to make a more informed decision about it is valuable in my opinion. Just look out for yourself and do the research that you need to judge whether or not you think a particular piece of media is worth your time or not. Maybe you just like to experiment. That's fine too. If that's what you enjoy, go for it. But the number itself, devoid of context, is useless. And if you have the context already about how the number was formed, then you don't need the number. For me, I think the industry at large would be trending in a far better direction if we could somehow move past the need or this debate about review scores. I think we're starting to trend in that direction over the past few years, especially with the rise of, say, game streams and YouTube content over the last decade or so. We have access to a plethora of information that we can use as ourselves, as consumers, to judge whether or not a game or a piece of media will be valuable to us. Valuable enough for us to make that call. I think that's a pro for the consumer. And I still think we should participate in smart consumer practices. So I'm going to call the video there for today. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And leave a comment down below with your favorite game that you've played in the past year. It could be a new game, could be an old game. Just what game have you played recently that you really enjoyed? And let me know why, because I would love to hear your thoughts and hear your perspectives and hear the reasoning for why you enjoy a particular game so much. And if the reasoning is just you find it fun, that's fine too. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.